And welcome, everybody. This is the Wednesday wrap-up, however you are watching, wherever you may be listening. Welcome. And, of course, we are just after Christmas. Hope all of you had a great time. And, of course, we are just ahead of the new year. This is our final Wednesday wrap-up of the year. And, of course, my co-hosts aren't here with me today. They are with friends and family. And so I'm doing it solo here. And but they all say hi, of course. And, of course, they will be back in the new year. So other than that, we can get rolling on this. And, one of the things I want to kick it off with is there seems to be more and more traction with the thought that Tomlin might be moving on from Pittsburgh. Some of it, obviously, this could potentially be their, kind of more disappointing down the stretch period. And then there's being called into question if there's a culture issue, because now you have multiple receivers that have not, put out a ton of effort on, especially running plays or plays that they didn't think they were really going to be too much of a part of. So they're starting to think, the rumors are really starting to gain some traction on whether or not Tomlin could be out the door. Obviously, they bounced back this last week, and, Pickens has a huge day after saying he didn't want to block to avoid getting hurt, which obviously is a bad look in the NFL in general. But, at the end of the day, even if that's what you're thinking, you can't put that soundbite out there. But then you look at it, and are there teams that would be interested in Tomlin? Of course. And of course, the ones that you'd be looking at are ones that were minority owners in the Steelers before, which obviously brings up the Panthers, who are looking for a coach. The Washington Redskins, they had a little bit of ownership interest in the Steelers previously. So, would they be a good fit there? Obviously, yes. Ron Rivera, he's closing out the season, but he's not their guy. They inherited him with the new ownership group. It hasn't gone well. They've fired most of their coaching staff at this point. So you have to think they're going to be moving on. If it really does look like, the potential for him being released or traded, or, however that looks, those two teams would be the first ones to pick up the phone, because they've worked with him before. They've been in that building with him. They know exactly how it works. And vice versa. He knows exactly who they are, right? They were part of that ownership group before. So it's not like it would be an unknown. I also think he would end up with a little bit more grace as far as trying to build something had he gone to the Panthers, rather than the turnover that they've had there. Obviously, Washington is a whole new ownership group. And so this is their first stab at creating a new environment. And, Tomlin could easily be that guy. But with the way that the last few weeks have gone, obviously this last weekend was fine, but those storylines have really started to gain some traction on whether or not the Steelers could be finally moving on from Tomlin. Obviously, they weren't going to do it during the season. I don't think he deserved having that happen during the season either. Plus, they had a winning record at the end of the day, so it's not like they were horrible. They just couldn't seem to really do anything on offense, and I think that's where patience was starting to wear thin. And for all intents and purposes, it looks like you could potentially see Tomlin on a different sideline next year, which would be kind of crazy. But you're going to see Belichick on a different sideline as well. So, I mean, there's a real chance that just the landscape of the teams around the league are going to be very different. And this is going to be one of those seasons where there could be 10 coaches fired by the end of the, at the end of the season, which is crazy turnover. But it just seems to be that kind of season. All right. So since we didn't do our Monday show, I'm going to do my power rankings. Obviously the schedule of this week has been a little bit off. My guy, Mr. U, the show we're normally on Monday mornings, he wasn't feeling well, so we didn't end up doing that show. And so we didn't end up going through our power rankings, but we did have some movement after this week. And obviously taking that top spot is going to be the Ravens. So, I mean, I had the Niners. The Niners have been holding that top spot for weeks. and you can't ignore the fact that they just got beat up. So I'm going to take the Ravens here. Now, if they go head to head again, do I think the Niners look as bad as they did? No, definitely not. I don't think that Purdy ends up with, what, he had 3 or 4 picks. Some of those were tipped balls, but even still, I don't know that they fail in quite that same way. So I'm going to go with the Ravens in that top spot, and I'm only moving the Niners down 1 spot. So they're still in my second spot. So basically they just kind of traded positions there, but I didn't think that loss constituted them really taking a huge drop. At the end of the day, the Ravens were who I had in the Super Bowl at the beginning of the season. So that I don't see that as such a bad loss. So I'm going to go with the Ravens at 1, the Niners at 2. I have the Dolphins at 3. The Eagles slipped to 4. The Eagles are just not playing great football. And, it's not that it's anything new. We've seen them playing poorly throughout the season, but they've been able to win those games. And now those wins just aren't quite coming. So I don't, and even in a win, I didn't like how they won. So I'm going to go with the Eagles sliding to that 4th spot. I have the Lions standing pat at 5. I have the Bills climbing to 6. I like what I'm seeing out of the Bills. They're pushing at the right time, right? Like they're coming into life when it matters down the stretch here. They had some ugly losses early in the year, but it's really starting to come together. And so I like the way that they're playing. They're starting to protect the football a little bit better. So that's where I have the Bills climbing. And on the other end of it, I have KC continuing to slide. They are in that 7th spot, obviously losing to the Raiders. It's a divisional game, so you can always drop a divisional game. They know you, they play you well. The last time they played, they jumped out to that 14-point lead before KC rallied back and ended up winning. But it's even with that, the Raiders aren't a great team. They are on their backup quarterback. There's a lot of elements to it that KC should be rolling through some of these teams that they're not. So it begs to question how vulnerable is that offense. Obviously, the defense plays fairly well, but that offense really hasn't looked sharp most of the season. And some of it is they don't have a great receiving core. Kelsey hasn't looked as dynamic as he has in the past. So I understand that he's been hurt, but everybody's hurt, right? Every team is banged up. You got to play with the guys you got. And at the end of the day, with the amount of drops that they have and just kind of just bad play overall, right? Like they've had weird penalties at bad times. Obviously Tony is a liability. Kelsey hasn't been as dynamic as he's been. He's actually even had some drops, which is uncharacteristic for Kelsey. So those are all things that kind of lead into KC sliding on this list a little bit. I have the Browns climbing up to the 8th spot. Obviously, I'm not a huge Flacco believer by any means, especially this stage in his career. But the rest of that team is really good. And I mean, with the defense that started out at a historic stopping rate, and then they do have good running backs. They have nice elements. So they needed good quarterback play. And if Flacco does anything else, he is consistent, right? Like he'll throw for a couple of touchdowns and he'll probably throw a pick. But if you have a good defense that can make stops and you have a running game that you can lean into, Flacco can get it done for you. So is he elite or, a difference maker, as Cam would say? No. I mean, he's every bit the game manager, but he's not going to typically lose you a game. Like if the rest of the elements are there, you can win a lot of games with Flacco, even at he's 38, I think. So even at this stage in his career, he can still win you a lot of games. And so that's how I have the Browns continuing to climb here. Again, because they're stacking wins. So, you can't hate on that. I have the Cowboys continuing to slide as well. They are sitting at 9th. So they are one where, I've said it well, for years really, but this year too, is they have a hard time finishing in December. And I mean, are they locked into the playoffs? Absolutely. They're going to the playoffs. They got that locked up. Not a problem. But they're backing into the playoffs, right? They're losing their games coming in. So they have negative momentum coming into a game where they're going to be on the road anyway. So, I mean, realistically, I think the Eagles probably end up winning the division. So the Cowboys end up going on the road. Depending on their matchup, that may not be great, especially the way they've been playing as of late. So the Cowboys are still in the top 10, obviously, but they sit there at 9th, and I don't believe in them. Right? They've dropped some games that they should have won, and then still sitting at 10. I like the Rams here. They've played really well, and they've managed to stay healthy, something they weren't able to do last year. And they have just enough players on this roster in starting roles that are all still healthy to make them a very dangerous team. And, it's one of the things that I talked about them throughout the season is as long as everybody stays healthy, they can be good. As soon as their starters start to get hurt, they got nothing as far as depth is concerned. So if anybody gets hurt, that's going to be a real problem. But, that's, again, it's what you deal with in the NFL, especially after, for them, all the money they put out to go win that ring. It's the situation they got dealt. And, fortunately for them, they've been able to stay relatively healthy. So this is one where it'll be interesting to see, if they end up getting that final spot locked up, do they start to rest people? I don't think they have enough of a lead to lock up a spot outside of winning in week 18. But, of course, they finished the season against the Niners. That could be great for Seattle if Seattle pulls off the win versus the Steelers. And then, of course, at the end of the year with Arizona, if they can win out, they would actually trade spots in the standings there. And you would end up with a pretty fun storyline in that you would have the Rams going against the Lions in that scenario. And you'd have Goff against his former team, Stafford against his former team in a playoff game. It would be exciting. The NFL would love it. So if all of the script believers out there, that's the outcome you have to assume they're trying for, right? I don't think it's scripted, but it would still be a fun storyline. It would be sort of that payback option for the two guys. Now, obviously, Stafford doesn't really have that because he went off and won a ring. So, I mean, obviously the trade worked out perfect for him. But all things being equal, Goff has played considerably better in Detroit than he did in LA as well. So, I think that'll be a fun battle. But so, yeah, that gives me my 10th spot there in the Rams. And, of course, honorable mention there is the Seahawks trying to rebound from having a tough stretch in the middle of the season. So they are hovering around that spot. If it were to end today, the NFC West would actually have 3 teams in it. You'd have the Niners, the Rams, and the Seahawks all going. So, so those are my power rankings. Normally we do those Monday mornings on our show with Mr. U and Herb Monday mornings at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. And so if you haven't seen it, be sure to tune in on that. You can see it either on, they call me Mr. U's YouTube page or on my YouTube page as well at Football-Talk. All right, so let's get into this playoff picture a little bit. We got... normally I would have a graphic here, but it didn't want to load. So we will improvise a little bit here. And okay. All right. So we're starting to have more of the clinched spots. So in the AFC, the Ravens, the Dolphins, they both clinched. So they are in. On the NFC side, we have the Niners, the Lions, Eagles, and Cowboys. They've all clinched. And so all of a sudden, those are just going to be jockeying for position more than anything else. The Niners are still in that number 1 spot, though, having the tiebreaker against the Eagles and the Cowboys. All right. So in the hunt. So my in the hunt's a little bit different than most other stations. They usually say in the hunt for the ones that are outside looking in. I have in the hunt for anybody that isn't actually locked into their spot, and then the ones that are the outside looking in are on the bubble in my charts. So so in the hunt we have KC, who for all intents and purposes is going to win their division, so they'll end up getting in. The Jags, they should still get in, but they haven't looked good. So I mean, there's a chance that they could fall out of it, but realistically, they should pretty much get in. The Browns, they should be just about a lock here after this next week. The Bills, their odds have gone way up. They're sitting in that 6th spot. And of course, the Colts are still kind of fending off Atlanta to be in there. So that's or sorry, not Atlanta, but that's who they played this last week. So anyway, but the Colts are in that spot. And then on the NFC side, we have the Bucks. You know, it's funny. I've talked a lot about not believing in Baker, and you know, he's been coming, and you know, he's got the lead in that division. It's going to be a tall order for someone to take it from him at this point. So the Bucks are realistically probably going to be in. Obviously, the Rams are a almost lock. I think that if they win this week, they pretty much lock up a spot to be in the playoffs. And of course, the Seahawks, again, if it ended today, would be in that 7th spot after beating the Titans this last week. Now, you don't really feel super good about those Seahawk wins, being as they've been last second. I mean, obviously a win's a win, and you want those, but they haven't exactly been playing dominant football. So even if they get in, can they make a run? That's a real question. The Rams, they've played well enough with everybody that I think they could make a legitimate run. And then, of course, we have on the bubble, we got the Texans, the Steelers, Bengals, Raiders, Broncos. Now, the Broncos are realistically done. They're just not mathematically out. But after this week, there's some interesting storylines starting to surround the Broncos at this point, because now you have Sean Payton earlier today announcing that Russell Wilson will not be the starter this coming week. It will be Jarrett Stidham, and it will probably be for the last 2 weeks. Now, some of that is, hey, maybe we want to see what we have in our backup. Although Peyton's staff brought Stidham in, so I mean, they know exactly what he is. You know, obviously there's starting to be questions after dropping 3 of the last 4. Are they going to try and find a way to get off of Wilson and free up cap space to try and do some other things? So, you know, after losing some of these games, now the storylines become back to, are they going to try and move on from Wilson, or are they just giving Stidham a chance to get some game reps because they're basically out of the mix? In either scenario, they're going to be a team to kind of keep an eye on, especially moving forward. And then, of course, you know, again, like the Raiders are basically out. They have an 11% chance. That win obviously gave them that 11% chance, because if they would have lost that game, it would have been over. It would have been they would have been eliminated. The Bengals, they have a real tall task. Not only do they have to win out, but they need a lot of help to be able to get in. Same with the Steelers. Their season is essentially over. They're sitting there with a 17% chance. And the Texans, you know, unfortunately for Texans fans, you know, they're just not going to get quite enough done. They are essentially the team I thought they were at the beginning of the season, though. I figured they would be roughly a 7-win team. They're sitting, you know, not they're 8-7. So, I mean, I thought they were a little bit ahead of schedule, and, you know, it's unfortunate. It looked like they could have snuck into the playoffs, but, you know, another good off season, and they'll be a very competitive team. So, I mean, if you're a Texans fan, you're a little sad that they weren't able to sneak in this year, but, you know, the future's bright for them. And then, of course, on the NFC side, you have the Vikings. after dropping that game to Detroit, that just about finishes them off. They have a 30% chance, but that would require a lot of help. The Falcons at just 10%. They pretty much shot their season at this point. Green Bay at 24% to get in. Another one where they need a bunch of help. I don't think they're going to get it. The Saints are basically done. I do think that they probably can win this weekend, but it's not going to matter. And then, of course, the Bears at a 1%. Well, I think it's actually less than 1%, but it's not technically over for them. But the Bears are done, so they will be on my eliminated list for next week. And of course, are eliminated. We have the Jets, the Titans, the Chargers, Patriots, Giants, Commanders, Cardinals, and Panthers. They're all done for the year. So now they just get to focus on being the spoiler. If they get to play anybody that's on the bubble, they can come in and try and wreck their season. And, sometimes that's all you want to do. That's what the Lions ended up doing last year, is you want to finish on a high note. You want to finish with a win. If you can knock, especially if it's a division rival out, like the Lions did last year to Green Bay. The Seahawks had already won. So the Lions essentially were eliminated. Had Green Bay won, Green Bay would have went in place of the Seahawks. But the Lions come, they finish their season off. They knock off Green Bay, finish Rodgers' career in Green Bay with a loss, and it kept a division rival from going to the playoffs also. So sometimes that last game is that's your win, is to just play spoiler against somebody else that's trying to get in. So so that's kind of the playoff picture as it sits today. Obviously, that all changes tomorrow night, soon as the last Thursday night football of the season kicks off. But it's always an evolving list of of teams, especially this late in the season, especially this year with the amount of backup quarterbacks that have been in at this point. I want to say it was like 65 different quarterbacks have started this year, which is insane. It might have been more at this point. Crazy number of backups that are still starting. Especially when you figure you have Rodgers and Cousins out with, Achilles tears, and you ended up with Anthony Richardson going down and Burrow out and Herbert out. And just some huge names all across the league that just couldn't make it through this season. And in a bunch of these cases, even the backups ended up getting hurt. So pretty crazy stuff. All right, so switching gears a little bit, we're going to go to the Dodgers contracts. And this one is interesting. This reminds me a little bit of the 90s era of the Yankees, where they were just buying players. They essentially played with an all-star team. Now, for them, it worked out. They ended up with a lot of rings out of it during that era. And this is one where the Dodgers better end up with some rings, because they're paying just under $1.3 billion for 3 players. And those contracts are crazy. Ohtani's is a 10-year, $700 million, which is even weirder when you think that the first 5 years of this 10-year contract are all deferred. So he's actually going to only get $2 million a year from the Dodgers for the first 5 years of that. And then the last 5 is where it all pays out, which is absolutely crazy to me. Obviously, that's fine for him. They say he's making something north of $44 million a year in endorsements. So it's not like he necessarily needed the money from them. So, fair enough. But you have to think in that next 5 years, when Ohtani, one, probably isn't pitching anymore. That's if he can come back and pitch at all. But after having 2 Tommy John surgeries, you have to think that even if he does come back, is he a starter? If he is, it's probably for 1 year, maybe 2. And then like on the outside, it'd be 3. After that, it's probably maybe in a relief role if he can still do it. And then, of course, Now you're paying $700 million for essentially a designated hitter, which is pretty crazy. Not to say he's not an amazing hitter, but $700 million is a crazy figure for a DH. And then you move over to Mookie Betts. He's got a 12-year, $365 million. That's another one where that pay is going to be, it's still going to be high when production is low. So this is one where they're going to have to win a ring or two in these first couple years to make this make sense. And then, of course, Yamamoto, they just signed for 12 years, $325 million. That one is a little bit more manageable. But again, on the back end of that, you're going to have a pitcher that is getting money that probably isn't still pitching for you. I mean, 12 years from now, is he going to be an elite pitcher? I mean, maybe. But, you probably have 5 years of that contract where they are solid. So realistically, with these three guys making just under $1.3 billion, you need to win in the next 5 years. And you need to win more than once for these numbers to make sense. It's one of those situations like with the Rams, right? They paid everybody. They went and got a ring. So it's only dumb if it doesn't work, right? And that's where the Saints ended up with the problem. They spent a lot of money and they didn't end up getting a ring. In fact, they didn't really do anything in the playoffs. So then all of a sudden those decisions didn't make sense. If you go get a ring, awesome, right? Then you're like, okay, we got one. It's been forever. We can add this chip to the shelf. And but man, that is a lot of money for three guys. And with baseball, you need more than one guy. I mean, I guess at least a couple of these are pitchers, so that definitely helps. You can definitely win with some dominant pitching, even if the hitting isn't great. But man, it'll be interesting to watch. If you're a Dodgers fan, I mean, you got to be excited about the next few years, but beyond that, you got to be a little bit worried how the back end of these contracts are really going to affect this team. They could be, real competitive these first few years and then become the Tigers, right? So, but again, if you get a ring, hey, can't be too mad at it. All right. And then, of course, I want to talk a little bit of basketball here. Obviously, you heard my take on the in-season tournament. I wasn't a big fan of that. But I understand they do it in soccer. I'm not a big soccer fan, though, to be honest. But I know they do in-season tournaments in soccer, and it works for them, and that's fine. But I look at it as I grew up with an NBA where there wasn't load management and there wasn't just all the flopping and all of the, like, you didn't need incentive to actually play during the regular season. Yeah, I mean, you're making the big money, play, right? Like, that's why you're getting paid. It's also why you're going to the game. Like, I don't want to go to a game thinking I'm going to see players I want to see, say we're talking Lakers. Like, I'm not going to go thinking I'm going to see LeBron and AD, but they're just taking a night off and I'm just seeing bench players and watch them get blown out. Like, that's, and of course, it's not like they let you know ahead of time, right? They want you to still fill those seats. They want you to buy those tickets. So I'm not a fan of what it's doing to the game. But then where that kind of leads into just on the NBA side, we ended up with another athlete in a career destroying type thing. It similar, not necessarily completely similar, but kind of similar to Aaron Hernandez. He signs that huge contract, ends up, on murder charges, and, everybody's seen the path of where Aaron Hernandez went. And of course, just recently here this last week, Chance Comanche, a former G League, Kings G League player, he was still currently active when he did this. He became former once charges were officially filed. But he confessed to the kidnapping and murder with his girlfriend of one of her friends. It's actually here from Washington State. And they ended up finding her remains in Vegas. it coincided with when his G League team was in Vegas for basketball. They had suspicion that they were the ones that were involved in the kidnapping because she had gone missing, but then they ended up finding her remains. Over this last week, they've actually admitted to kidnapping and killing her. So just crazy stuff. I always find it interesting when, people that have really, really hit it, right? Guys like Aaron Hernandez, right? He's I think his contract was, it was something crazy. It was like 40 million or something like that. I don't remember exactly offhand, but to then just turn around, he hadn't even actually started getting paid on that contract. He had just signed it and, ends up with murder charges. It just absolutely crazy to me. It seems like you got to step away from those circles that potentially put you in harm's way. Something similar to Morant, right? Obviously he comes back from his suspension on his second, gun issue, brandishing a gun on Instagram, right? And not that he necessarily did anything illegal, right? You can have firearms. It's not that. It's just the league protecting itself. But it's one of those where you need someone in your circle that needs to say no, right? Like be like, hey, man, you can't be doing these types of things, right? You're going to ruin this career that you've been working your entire life to get to. And, so it's sad to see these things happen. Just a crazy story popping up. Now, obviously, he was a G League player, so he wasn't necessarily making the huge money that, you could be making once you get to the NBA or if you're in the NFL or any of the major leagues. But, it's just kind of crazy to me that people will go through that level of self-sabotage. Now, obviously, this one is, sad because someone actually ended up getting killed in the process. But it's, absolutely nuts to me. And then, of course, I touched on a little bit earlier is the, talking about the NFL is Sean Payton announcing that Stidham is his guy. That's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out because, from the outside, there's been obvious friction between Payton and Wilson all season. Not just during the game, but in post-game press conferences, just the interactions in general have not necessarily looked like the coach and the quarterback have been on the same page. So I do find it interesting that they're moving to have Stidham start. Obviously their season is over. And that's why I posit the theory that, he could just be trying to see what he has in Stidham, get Stidham some game reps, maybe try and get some spark to the team. Either any of those ways that you look at it, you're trying to finish with a positive note as far as the season, whether you know what you have in your backup, whether or not you're moving on from Wilson and maybe Stidham's your guy. They did bring Stidham in, Peyton likes him, so there's all of these elements. And then, talking to another coach in the NFL, when you're looking at Sean Payton and he's yelling at someone, one of the things that he told me was he's that guy to everybody, right? During the game, like he's intense and he'll rip into anybody, but brilliant coach. And so it's not that you can really fault him. I think I think he probably does end up doing that to other players, other position coaches, but the cameras really only focus in on him when he's talking to Wilson. So there might be a little bit more emphasis on their interactions just because it happens to be what hits the camera. But at the end of the day, there does seem to be a little bit of an issue, and it'll be interesting to see this offseason if they are fielding phone calls for Wilson, or if they then, come back around and say, hey, no, he's our guy. I don't know how they could move on from him. This was the first year of his new contract. So I don't think there's even an out until after next season. So realistically, I think they kind of are stuck with what it is they have at the moment. But the Broncos are going to be very interesting to watch as Sean Payton molds this back into what it is he wants. And, you know, I'm not convinced that Wilson is what he wants as far as the quarterback for that team. The play on the field hasn't supported it. The interactions between them hasn't supported it. So that one will be fun to watch. Yeah, so we are cutting it off a little bit early today. We have some friends and family that are here in town, so we're going to hang out with them. Thanks again for tuning in. If you are watching on Roku, be sure to hang out. Spitballing is up next. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Helps me a lot to bring you more content. Other than that, you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Happy holidays.